Do you have eyeshadow palettes lying around in your drawer that you like but you never use? Do you keep using the same 2 or 3 shades from every palette? I'm here to help. What's up, friends? Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are doing well. You might notice that today I am not wearing any eye makeup, and the reason for that is because today I'm going to be making my ultimate, my dream, my perfect neutral palette. I'm gonna be doing this by using eyeshadows that I already have in my collection. Maybe you're like me and you have a lot of like Viseart and Natasha Denona palettes that have magnetic removable pans. Maybe you have some indie singles, maybe you have other eyeshadow singles, etc. And they're just kind of causing a lot of clutter in your collection. And maybe you like those palettes, but you don't really get enough use out of them. I'm gonna show you guys how you can use the palettes that you already have to create your perfect palette, whether it be neutral, colorful, or maybe a little bit something in between. So hopefully you guys can get a little bit of inspiration from this video, because I'm going to be sharing all of my tips, my thought process for how you can go about this, and I'm going to bring you along on this journey with me as I make my perfect neutral palettes. And if this happens to be your first time here, then welcome, my friend. Thank you for stopping by. My name is Sophia, and this is my channel that focuses on all things beauty and luxury. Every single week I upload lots of content on luxury and high-end beauty. I also do videos like this that kind of teach us how to appreciate and reuse the collection that we have. And I also do videos on luxury fashion and lifestyle. So if that sounds of interest to you, then you're in the right place, my friend. Hit that subscribe button to join our fam. And you can also click the notification bell to hear about every time I upload a new video. If you watch this video and you end up liking it, if you find it helpful, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. It really helps me out. And as I always do, I'll be linking the palettes that I'm using in this video in that description box down below. But remember, you don't need to buy these palettes. You can use what is already in your collection. Okay, party people, let's get into it. So this is how this video is gonna go. First, I'm gonna give you some background on why I decided to do this and sort of show you the palettes that I have in my arsenal today. Then I'm gonna tell you guys the 4 questions that you need to ask yourself before jumping into this activity that's gonna help you sort of be organized and figure out what kind of palette you wanna make. It's gonna make you feel less overwhelmed about this process. Then I'm gonna take you guys along for the ride, and I'm gonna show you how I make my palettes and sort of my thought process as I go. And then at the end, I'm gonna be doing a look with one of the palettes that I create. So let's get into it. So I first had the idea for this video when I was creating a Viseart video around Black Friday time. They were having their sale, and I was telling you guys what I thought was worth buying in the sale and what wasn't worth buying in the sale. If you guys are not familiar with Viseart, they are a fantastic makeup brand. They specialize in eyeshadows. They're one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas. And I told you guys in that video that I have all of these Viseart Slim Pro palettes that I never really use. And the reason that I don't really use them is because they're more geared towards makeup artists. They're either all shimmers or they're like this one that are all mattes. And I don't usually reach for an all matte palette to get a complete look. And then just as I'm, doing my makeup, having fun, I don't often grab multiple palettes to create my look. I just don't do that. I like to have everything in one palette. So I told you guys I was sort of thinking of just creating my own custom palette using these Viseart Slim Pros. And you all said, please film it. Sophia, we want to do this too, but we don't really know how to go about it. And so that's how this video came about. And you know what? You don't need Viseart palettes to do this. All the Viseart palettes are magnetic, like the little shadows are magnetic, and so are the palettes. So it makes it really easy to customize them. But maybe you have some Natasha Denona palettes. Those are very similar. Maybe you have some indie brand singles. There's a lot of brands out there that have magnetized eyeshadow pans, and so you should be able to use those. If some of your shadows are not magnetized, you can definitely just do the original depotting method, buy a magnetized palette component and do it that way. It takes a little bit longer, but that being said, it's still a very fun activity and it's still totally doable, and you'll be very impressed and very happy with the result. So what are the palettes that I'm going to be working with today? Well, first I have these 2 all matte palettes from Viseart. We have number 1, the neutral mattes, and these are, well, they're neutral mattes. They're very basic, and I usually just reach for like 1 or 2 shades here if I can't find that shade in another palette that I'm using, but there's some really good staples in this one. Second, I have another neutral mattes one from Viseart. This is the Neutral Mattes Milieu, and this is great because this one actually has some deeper shades and some slight pops of color, I guess you could say, almost neutral pops of color compared to the regular neutral matte, so I have a little bit more to work with here. And then in addition, I have these two beautiful, stunning shimmer palettes from Viseart. I love these, and it really pains me to say that I don't use them that much for the reasons mentioned before. First up right here, I have these sultry Muse shadows. As you can see, these are some really beautiful, really soft, neutral shimmers here from Viseart. And then we have another very similar palette, which is called the Paris Nudes. These palettes are both very similar. I would say the Paris Nudes, if you guys are curious, the difference is that the colors are just a little bit softer, lighter, more browny in nature, and just are a little bit more of like a satin formula, whereas the Sultry Muse has a little bit more sparkle. But they're really great if you just want some basic neutral shades. All right, section number 2. What are the 4 questions that you need to ask yourself before you dive into this activity that are gonna help you along the way? The first thing, maybe it seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. You need to decide how many palettes you want to make. I have 4 palettes worth of shadows here. I'm gonna make 2 palettes because I know that I have plenty of shades to make the 2 perfect palettes. I could make 4, right? But I feel like that's too much for me. Maybe I can use the extra shades to make another palette some other time, but for the purposes of this activity, I'm gonna make 2. You need to think about how many shadows you have in maybe each color story, etc. But I think just kind of limiting yourself to say, no, I'm only gonna make 1, I'm only gonna make 2, it's just gonna help keep you on track. Question number 2, what percentage of mattes to shimmers do you want? Think about how you do your makeup. This is your palette. You can make it however you want. Some people, they just use like 1 medium tone brown. That is their 1 matte shade. And then they like to go in with any number of shimmers all over the lid. Or are you somebody that you like to create smoky looks? You like to create more, technical looks, then you're probably going to want to include more matte. So I think you need to ask yourself, what ratio do you personally like? Think about the palettes that you already use in your collection. When you open them up, are there like 2 or 3 shades that are always panned? Like think about the shadows that you reach for and if they are shimmery and if they are matte. Personally, I like to have a good even ratio. So I'm gonna be looking for half of the palette to be mattes and half of the palette to be shimmers. Question number 3, what undertone or color story are you looking for? Do you want a cool tone palette? Do you want a warm tone palette? Do you want it to be more neutral, or do you want it to be kind of a mix of everything? What do you reach for? Because for me, I like to think of a specific color story that I have in mind, and maybe it's not about the undertone for you. Maybe you want to create a pink palette. Maybe you want to create a green palette. Let me show you some examples here of palettes that I created with my Natasha Denona shadows. Right here you can see I clearly had like a neutral pink, mauve, kind of burgundy theme in mind. So that's how I organized these shadows. Some of them are more cool tones, some of them are neutral, some of them are warm tone, but I had sort of a color story in mind to keep me on track because I had so many shadows to choose between. And then similar with this one, you can see I clearly wanted to do a bronzy, a gold, a brown type of theme. And I particularly love warm tones, so you're gonna see a lot of warm tones in this palette. For this exercise, my goal is going to be to create one sort of neutral warm tone palette and then one cool tone palette, because I want these palettes to basically be the 2 palettes that I can take with me anywhere and I can get any kind of look. And that's just kind of how my brain functions. I want one that's more warm toned and one that's more cool toned. And then the last question number 4 that you need to ask yourself, and maybe this seems obvious, friends, but think about the kind of looks that you're going to create. Realistically, what are the looks that you're going to create? If you never do a smoky eye, don't be putting a matte black in there. If you want this to be more of like a day look palette, maybe keep the colors a little bit lighter. If you want this to be something where no matter where you go, this is like one palette to rule them all, maybe include a mix of mattes, different shimmers, maybe some topper shades. You get the gist of it. Like really envision how am I going to be using this palette? And then as you're making the palette, think to yourself, if I were to actually go through the motions of starting to create a look, is that shade there? Like for me, I always reach for that one transition shade, that medium tone transition shade first, and I need to make sure that that goes in the palette. Think to yourself, what would I reach for first? That's something that you need to keep in mind when you're putting the palette together. All right, friends, those are my tips for getting started. Now let's get into me building my palettes.
Okay, friends, welcome to my workspace. This is just my work desk, as you can see. And what I'm gonna start doing first actually is swatching the two shimmer palettes. So I have an understanding of what are my favorite shimmers in these palettes. I have a little bit of an idea because I've used these palettes before, but the shimmers are what matters to me most in a look, especially for a neutral look. I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna swatch these, and whichever shades really make my heart sing, I'm gonna take those out and prioritize and start sorting those first. And then I'm gonna go over to the matte palettes right here, and I'm gonna start picking out matte shades that I think are going to best complement the shimmer shades. Maybe it's the opposite for you. Maybe it's kind of like you go more for the matte shades and you could do it vice versa. But for me, what really sparks joy in my experience putting on makeup are the shimmer shades. So this is where I'm gonna start off first. Another way that you can do this, friends, to start off, and it just depends on like how you do your makeup. If you are somebody that you really only use like 3 shades, 4 shades when you do your makeup, you can actually start grouping the shadows in like a quad format. A lot of times when you see palettes that have a lot of shades, they arrange them in a way so that they kind of suggest certain colors to be used together. And so this is just like a quick little example that I put together because I started pulling out some of the like cool tone shimmers. I just popped out a matte from one of the other palettes to show you. This is another way that you can do it if this is the best way to kind of organize it in your head. And then you'll see later when we arrange the palette, you can also arrange the palette in this kind of manner. Okay, friends, so let me show you where I'm at with the shimmers. So I basically took all of the shimmers out, I swatched them on my hand, and because I already decided like what sort of tones I want, I was able to organize the shadows into warm tones and into cool tones. And then there's a couple of shadows right here that it's like, I just don't really like. There's a little bit too much of like a glitter formula to them. And then this one purple, I know I'm never gonna use that. So I set those aside. What you're seeing right here that I also did is I kind of organized the colors in terms of tone, like sort of light to dark and then matching up some of the similar tones. And the reason for that is clearly because I can only pick 6 of each for each shadow. So I need to eliminate about half the shades that we're seeing here. And especially with the more like pinky, warm tone color story over here, a lot of these shades are similar. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna swatch the similar shades and I'm gonna opt to remove some of them. The other thing that I need to keep in mind when I'm doing this is not just the ones that I like the most, but also like what sort of depth do I want to get? So like I don't want this many mid-tone shades. I want maybe 2 light ones, 2 medium tone ones, and 2 dark ones because I like to have some variety. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. All right, so here's how we're doing. I was able to narrow the warm toned ones down to 8, and I'm gonna keep it this way just for now. I know I said I was gonna do half and half shimmer and matte, but I'm gonna wait until I pop the mattes out to kind of see if I wanna prune any more of these away. Some of these look similar, but when you swatch them, they actually look a lot more different. And then over here, I'm still working on the cool toned ones. Just wanna show you guys, you know, like I am I don't reach for a lot of like blues all the time, but I do in this cool tone look want to have some of these like more bluey tone shades because I really like these two. So I want to have some dark, like at least one dark shimmer to kind of complement the look. One tip I have is you can kind of see I've swatched them here on my hand. On first thought, I was going to go for one color, which was the light blue and then the one that's right underneath, but I actually noticed that it's the darker, more charcoal-y color that better complements that lighter blue. So while I think I like this shade a little bit more, I think this one is going to go better with these two shades that I really like, and then I can have a darker, more blue matte, you know, maybe it'll be this one, maybe it'll be one of the grays to kind of complement it, and then this one just becomes kind of redundant. So that's also a good way to just kind of eliminate them, is do the swatches and think about how some of these might go together with different looks. And then once you bring the mattes in, it'll start to kind of come together. Okay, friends, so we have some of the shimmers narrowed down up here, and then what you see down here, I've just pulled out the mattes that I feel like speak to me the most from the two palettes. You can see there's a bunch of shades that I didn't take out at all. Like, I'm not looking to use some of these more vibrant colors because I really want it to be all about the shimmers, but I took out sort of like some medium toned browns, and then I also pulled out some of these deeper and smokier colors. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of matching these up with the shimmers that I picked, just based off of which tones complement each other the most, right? So like if I'm looking at this, I might choose, you know, this more warmer tone brown to go with this palette, or I might choose this cooler tone brown to go with this palette. You can definitely mix it up, but like, for instance, I think that this shade best complements this palette as opposed to the cool tone, because I wouldn't really, personally, I would not pair this very peachy, warm tone, mid-tone brown with like these cooler tone shimmers. That's what I'm gonna do next. All right, so let me show you something that I'm trying to do right here that I'm trying to narrow down. I have here, I put the black here in the cool toned section, and then I've got 4 kind of medium toned mattes here. I want to include this sort of neutral cocoa brown. It swatches, you guys will see, it's like the darkest shade right there. Those are all of the mattes. And I'm trying to figure out like which ones I should keep. And while I'm very fond of all of them, I'm sitting here and thinking, okay, what could I pair this with? What could I pair this with? What could I pair this with? And when I look at this, I think that probably this shade, even though I am quite fond of it, it's probably the one that needs to go. Either this one or probably this one, because this gray shade really complements like the black and these shades that are up here, so I don't want to get rid of that. So these are just some tricks that you guys can do, like when you're trying to eliminate them. Really picture like which of these mattes, the undertone, are gonna best complement the matte shades. And you can kind of see I swatched that blue just to make sure that it better complements the gray. Alrighty, friends, so I have narrowed the shades down. I just kind of went back and forth, swatched, you know, some of the similar shades, and some of these shades look a little bit similar, especially in the warm tone palette, but when you swatch them, they actually have very different looks and undertones. And just kind of going through, you know, swatching similar shades and seeing which things would pair well together. That's what I did. And also, I don't think I explicitly mentioned this, but you probably have noticed when it comes to the mattes, I like to have kind of a gradation of mattes. So there are a lot of mattes that I liked, but I needed to have at least one lighter one medium one, maybe 2 medium ones, and then 1 or 2 darker ones. Sorry if you can hear the helicopter in the background here. And I did the same here. I feel like these are all coming across darker on camera, but I'll show you in the final result in a little bit more daylight. But like, I'm always gonna reach for this lighter color first, and then I'll kind of deepen things up with these other shades. And some of these, you know, like these are 2 medium tone browns, but when I look at the palette, I know that this shade is gonna go really well with like these colors, and then I know this shade and this shade might go better with some of the like even more cool tone ones. So now I'm gonna put them in the palettes and show you guys what it looks like.
All right, friends, the moment you've all been waiting for, it's time for the unveiling of the palettes. First up, we have the warm toned palette. I'll show you guys some daylight close-ups of this. I'm really happy with the way that this came out. This is a lot of neutral satin shades, but you know what, friends? That is what I like when it comes to kind of a holy grail neutral palette. And with these different shimmers, I tried to include ones that were a little bit lighter. Some of them are a little bit more neutral. Some of them are a little bit more warm tone. Some of them have a pink undertone. Some of them have kind of like a mauvey undertone. So I kind of over-indexed on the shimmers because as I was making the palette, that is what I gravitated towards. So I ended up including 2 more shimmers than I originally thought. And then I only included 4 mattes because as I was building the palette, I thought, you know what? I can get by with just these 4 mattes. Pretty much all of these will complement any of the shimmer shades in here. You know, I've got some medium tone, very basic browns. I've got a deep cocoa brown with a little bit of like a warm base, and then I have this beautiful kind of more aubergine purple type of color that really goes well with some of the more mauvey shades that are in the palette. What I thought was funny, friends, is that I actually think that this palette looks somewhat similar to what is pretty much my favorite Viseart palette, which is the Mink Set palette. So I'll show you guys a side-by-side of the Mink Set palette versus my palette. Now, when you kind of compare these side by side and you actually swatch them, mine is a little bit lighter and more neutral, and the Mink Set is a little bit more kind of orangey and warm tone, but I just thought that that was funny. This is one of my favorite palettes. But when I use that palette, sometimes I do kind of wish that I had some of these more, I don't know, like neutral champagne-y shades. So that is the warm palette. I'm so happy with it. And then this is the cool toned palette. I like this palette because I was able to get sort of some of like the frosty whites and blues, but then I also paired that with some of the more cool toned taupes. And some of these are like grays, but some of them are a little bit more beige and some of them are a little bit more gray, if that makes sense. And then in this palette, I did include 1 more matte. So I've got 5 mattes in this palette. And that's because I think with cool tones, I tend to go more for like a smokier look. And I just wanted some more undertones. And I really wanted to include a matte black in this palette because I do like to use matte black, especially if I'm doing more of a smoky going out look. And then lastly, friends, I am going to do a very quick look with the warm tone palette. Maybe I'll do a get ready with me using the cool tone palette. Comment down below if that's something that you guys would like to see. But I am gonna fast forward and do a quick look using the warm tone palette so that you guys can see what I'm able to create with this custom creation. All right, friends, this is the final look using my warm tone palette. I'm thrilled with how it came out. It was very easy to use. I love all the shadows. It's such a breath of fresh air being able to use these shadows but not having to go between 2, 3, 4 palettes, for example. I actually think my palette came out kind of like a mix between the Mink Set palette and maybe a Charlotte Tilbury palette, because some of the shadows you can see are a little bit more on like that pinky pillow talk kind of side, but I'm thrilled with the way it came out. Now it is your turn, friends. Sound off in those comments down below. I would love to know from you guys. Number 1, what do you think of the palettes that I created today? And also, was this video helpful? Was it entertaining? Would you like me to do this with maybe some more palettes that are in my collection? I already showed you the ones that I made using my Natasha Denona shadows, and so I thought it would be great to do this again with Viseart. So let me know all of your thoughts, what you thought of this video. Also, if you liked this video, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate that. And if you want some more tips for how to use your makeup, how to create different looks, reviews of new and upcoming products, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you are not already. And with that, friends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.